Welcome to WBN 001. Today we are joined with Jay Cobb. Jay is running for office in the newly formed 4th Congressional District. We really appreciate you being here today, Jay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to have this in 3 segments. The first will be we'll give Jay a chance to talk a little bit about who he is as a person, and then we'll go into the questions. Those questions are set into 8 total questions, 5 of which Jay has been given in advance, 3 he has not seen yet, and he'll answer as those are going on. We'll finish it up with Jay talking about his campaign and who he is as a candidate. Jay, why don't you take a couple minutes and tell us about Mr. Cobb?
Great, thank you. I appreciate being here. Again, appreciate you hosting this and allowing me to come and introduce myself to people. I'm running for Congress in the 4th District for a very specific reason. And I can sum up my campaign in one word, and that's results. We have been talking about our conservative vision for so long. We've been talking about how we need to reduce our deficit spending, how do we need to reduce our debt, how do we need to pull the federal government out of our lives and restore the proper balance between the state and the federal government, and restoring state sovereignty and giving more powers to the states. I believe in those things, and those are things I'm campaigning on. But I'm differentiating myself on effectiveness, because we've been talking about this for way too long. It's time we actually start doing something about it. I like to say we've been fighting the good fight. Now we need to win the good fight. And so that's why I'm running. I looked at the field, and I looked at myself, and I have something unique to offer. And I'll highlight those real quickly. And these are what I call my reasons to believe of why I'll be effective in D.C. First is I have the experience in Washington, D.C. I was legislative counsel back in the Senate, and my job was to read bills, to look for the unintended consequences and negotiate language. I've been in the trenches there in a divided Congress, and I know that things can get done and that we can actually make real and meaningful change with the right type of people back there. 2 is my background in education, my private sector experience. I have formal training in economics. I have a degree in economics and in law, and I also have an MBA, so I have the 3, economics, law, and business. I spent a lot of my career in the private sector in terms of working with small businesses. Most recently as a publicly traded company, and I've seen firsthand how government regulations stifle businesses, and I've seen businesses struggle and how they want to grow, and I understand those dynamics, and I understand how when laws are made, what the real impact is on business and on us and as individuals. I think that's an important perspective that your representative needs to have when they go back to Congress. 3rd is what I call my reasons for jumping in the race. I'm not a career politician. I'm not looking to work my way up the political hierarchy. I'm here because I think I have a unique skill set that at this particular time in history can be effective in Washington, D.C.
And when you say you're not a career politician, you've never held
elective office before.
So
correct.
Point blank period, this is the first.
Right. And normally you'd say, well, why is someone like that running for office? Well, again, I think it's because I have a unique skill set from all the other candidates that at this point in time, getting where our economy is and some of the pressing issues we have, that I have something to offer and something to contribute and something that would make a difference in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and as you stated, you are kind of the detail geek in a way. You know the ins and outs that a lot of people don't talk about.
Yep.
Well, let's go into the questions.
Okay, great.
Like I said, these 5 questions Mr. Cobb has been given in advance. You've talked about what could be called, and this is our term, a smoke and mirror game involving the issue of a balanced budget versus appropriations. Give clarity to this, and if elected, how do you plan on dealing with it?
Sure, and let me clarify up front. When we talk about a budget, I don't think it's smoke and mirrors, but I think it's important to understand how the budget works in the process of government spending overall. And I think that's important to know, because people get really worked up that we haven't passed a budget, and that's a pretty significant thing.
Yeah.
But when you understand how it works in the whole process, I don't get too worked up about it. It concerns me, yes, but the way you look at this is, every year the president offers a budget. That budget does not actually dictate and control the spending, because Congress takes it under consideration. And then what they're supposed to do is pass a budget resolution, right? And that sets caps on how they can spend. But even that is not completely binding. What that does is when a budget resolution is passed, it allows the House and Senate to have different rules that they can invoke in terms of how to get things passed. And so it's kind of sets a cap, but it's not, again, what actually sets the spending. It then goes to either appropriation bills, which is where the discretionary spending is done kind of a year by year. And then mandatory spending is the things that don't need appropriations every year that just keep going and going. It's the appropriations bill that I like to focus on because that is where the spending actually is taking place.
And a lot of people think when they're told that the budget, it's presented so that you believe that is where the spending occurs. But in fact, what you're saying is that it's the appropriations.
On discretionary spending, again, on mandatory spending, there's a different avenue. It's not renewed every year. But the point about that is if you look at the president's budget, I don't know any president's budget that's actually been adopted via appropriations bill kind of line by line. There's always differences. There are always changes. And so when we talk about spending, I think you have to go where the spending is actually done. There's also another process in there is that for all the spending, there's supposed to be an authorization bill. Congress authorizes, and that's where the policy set. And the appropriations, ideally, is supposed to just set the funding levels. Those have kind of been conflated over the years, and it's not a strict line anymore. Sometimes you'll get policy through appropriations bill, although technically that's not supposed to happen. But again, I like to focus on the bills and the areas where the spending is actually done. And that's why I say, we can talk about the budget, it's great, but a lot of times it becomes a political document. You need to focus on where the spending. If you want to make cuts, you change the funding, and you do that through appropriations or the mandatory spending bills.
All right. On to the next question. Without a doubt, one of the biggest issues being talked about is that of entitlements. Most responses that I've observed involve two areas, two main components with this. Those that are receiving the entitlements and those that authorize and create the entitlements. It would seem to address only those receiving the entitlements as a symptomatic approach to dealing with a problem. To correctly address the problem, it must require dealing with both the symptom and the cause. Do you agree with this? And if you were elected, how can you deal with this?
And let me make sure I understand kind of the terminology you're using. What I'm hearing, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is we have this kind of entitlement mentality, kind of a cultural problem of people expecting that, and then you have the people who actually enact that and actually create laws that create entitlement programs. Is that
correct? Yeah, you may have an individual who is on welfare, and they fall into that welfare mentality, as some will refer to it. So the receiving of the welfare is one, but the individual who put together the money for them to receive is the other.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that the reason we actually focus so much on the legislative side of the people actually creating entitlements is because really that's the direct control Congress has. They can change those programs. I think it does play into the entitlement mentality, right? But when you talk about people's kind of mindsets and kind of culture and what they have, that's a larger societal issue that certainly Congress by its laws can affect, but a lot of that's going to have to be changed through education and personal responsibility and teaching, generations about thrift and hard work and no free rides and some of those principles that we like to instill in our children and in generations. And so when you talk about addressing both, I think you do need to address both. I think Congress, though, and again, it's what I call the levers, the things they directly control. We can change and reform some of those entitlement programs, which do have an effect. But ultimately, I think it's going to come from us, teaching our children and instilling upon those values that we aren't entitled. We need to work, and we can reap the fruits of our labors. But we shouldn't expect things to be handed to us and given to us.
Yeah.
So there's a dynamic between both. But again, Congress's direct role, I think, is to change the programs, which will help people say, okay, it's not there anymore, or it's different than what I thought, and it's not going to be just a handout anymore.
Yeah. Number 3, what is your position on illegal immigration, the financial implications of illegal immigrants, and how do you plan to address the issue?
Sure. And I get this question a lot, so I appreciate
it's a very popular one.
I appreciate you asking this question. Whenever I talk about illegal immigration, I always talk about my driving principles, because I think it's important to know what my kind of principles are and my guideposts and my values. I don't believe in rewarding bad behavior. I don't believe in creating magnets for people to come here legally. I do support the Utah Compact, and I do believe this will be a federal solution. And so when I look at those principles and kind of harmonize those and translate them into policies, I come up with some very specific things. And to address those, I think you have to understand, again, a framework by which to look at illegal immigration. And most people break it up into three parts. You have borders. What do you do with people who are here illegally now? And then what do you do with what I call the going forward policy? What's the United States policy on illegal immigration going forward? I'll start with that one. I'm a free market guy. I believe in the free flow of labor, and I think we need to streamline our legal immigration process. You know, the fact that it takes 10 years for people who want to come here legally, I think is problematic. I think when you have a more streamlined process going forward, it takes pressure off the border. It won't solve that problem, but I think when you have the pressure off, we can more effectively strengthen the border. And I am an advocate of strengthening the border. I think we need more enforcement down there. But again, I think when you couple those two together, it's actually an addressable problem. It's not a futile effort down there. In terms of what do you do with people here who are legally now, I have what I call my rebuttal presumption system. And the way it works is I think there's a presumption that people who are illegal should be deported. But I think that can be overcome or can be rebutted if they can make a showing at an individualized hearing. There's hearings now that already take place, that they meet certain legal criteria and thresholds. I mean, obviously they can't have felonies or they can't be, doing bad things. But if the community values them and they've been contributing members, and they've been here for a long time, 25 years or whatever the number is, there should be a way for them to go into that going forward policy. It's not automatic citizenship, but it's a way for them to stay here legally and actually not be deported. Because I do not advocate breaking up families, like I said, who have been here for 25 years or so. I mean, people who have recently come in 1, 2, 3 years, I think that's different. But there has to be some type of individual consideration and an examination of everyone's circumstances. And I think that's important. That's important. I'm not a fan of a one-size-fits-all because I don't think the government always knows best. And again, if people have been here and been contributing, and part of it's the government's fault. They haven't been enforcing these laws for 25 years or whatnot. So, there should be a mechanism to allow them to go into the going forward policy.
And so to give clarification on that, if you were to go back to Washington, that's the direction.
Yes.
Would you also see it as where you're working hand in hand with the states?
Yeah.
As one size does not fit all, various states could change.
Well, absolutely.
Their needs.
The state has to have input. I don't think we'd give the states carte blanche discretion on crafting immigration policy. But certainly, some states have different needs and different aspects. The border states are going to be treated very differently than the interior states, right? And there has to be communication and cooperation. And I think you can pull the states into some of this. But again, I think it comes from the federal government. I completely understand where the state of Utah is coming from and their frustration because the government has not been doing their job. And they've passed laws to try to get the government's attention or to solve the problem themselves. And I understand that dynamic. But again, eventually I think it has to come from the federal government, and they need to include the states in any solution.
Okay. Okay, on to number 4. A number of people I have talked to have stated that they have left the political party that they belong to, and that's be it Republican or Democrat. And majority of the time, it's given in context of almost a protest of the corruption that they believe is occurring within the party. Others have also stated that they've switched parties so that they can participate in the political process when it comes to a specific candidate to address that candidate being what they perceive as corrupt. Now, the word corrupt, by definition, I'm using very, very loosely, just as somebody that they do not believe is doing what it is that they said they would do. That being the case, if it's true, this changes the landscape of the 2012 elections in Utah. What do you believe is the determining factor in the 2012 elections in Utah?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I think it's sad that we've come to a state where our government, our elected officials are so they behave in such a way that they don't garner the trust of the American people. I think that's a sad commentary on not the system necessarily, but on the people we elect. And we say, what will be the determining factor of this election? Look, we have a system where the people can vet candidates, especially the delegate system. We go to a primary. We need to elect better people. I think if you want to restore the confidence in Congress, you need to elect a different type of person who, I think what drives a lot of the distrust and a lot of the approval ratings in Congress is the hyper-partisanship that's back there. And I get why it's there. I understand why they do it. But sometimes, I just sit back and wonder, say, are they doing it for purely partisan reasons, or are they really looking after the good of our country and the good of Utah and the good, for the people? And I think we need people who will think a little bit differently and be back there not just for partisan reasons, but for the good of the country, and not just for re-election purposes, but for the good of their constituents. And that's a rare individual. That's my commitment. That's what I'm going back. Now, in terms of people switching and will that determine, you can talk about numbers there. I don't know how many of those people are actually doing that to try to influence it. Will it have an effect? Sure it will. And you know what? Again, that's the system we have. People can switch parties. That people can exercise their voice, and I like that. I invite more participation. Will it be the determining factor? I don't know. I don't know if it will, but for me in this race, I think the determining factor will be, the people who are voting and what they want and what their criteria. And I think they're sick and tired of kind of business as usual in D.C., and they're looking for someone who can not only stand up, but will look after them and will do what's good for the country. So, I think that's at least let's hope the criteria that people are using when they're judging the candidates.
Yeah, and to go back to there's a legal definition for the word corruption,
right.
But in this context, I think the word that you brought is really what resonates, and that is trust.
Yeah.
Most people, when they talk about this, when that line of trust is crossed and the trust is lost, the word of corruption becomes right there in that language. So in that question, just to be clear, it's not implying that there's a legal definition of corruption, but more of implied that when the trust is lost, they feel that the individual is defined with that word.
And I think it's when people feel that, the service that an elected official surrendered is being overtaken by the self-interest of the elected official. I think that's where the trust starts to break down.
Yeah.
And, realize part of that, though, is how the representative communicates to the constituents. I mean, one of the heavy burdens an elected official has is actually to communicate affirmatively to their constituents, not just wait for the constituents to come to them.
Yeah.
And I think communication can help earn and keep trust. And that's an important thing for a representative to do, and that's what I plan to do, because I know, this is a service position. It's not for my own self-interest or self-aggrandizement. I think it's important to listen to constituents and to reach out to them so that trust is maintained.
All righty. Sounds like some good answers there. Here's the fifth one, the last one that you were given in advance. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution states, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. However, there is in the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, which is known as the Elastic Clause, granting Congress the power to pass all laws necessary and proper for carrying out the enumerated list of powers. Explain in plain English both of these and how you intend to transfer many of the activities currently conducted by the federal government to the states."
Sure. Yeah, and you talk about the elastic clause, it's the necessary and proper clause. People refer to that as well. And I think it's important to realize kind of the dynamics between all these clauses and how they work together. Article 1, Section 8 talks about the powers given to Congress. And the necessary and proper clause, in my opinion, is bounded by those powers. It was really kind of an enabling type of thing, saying, okay, you have these powers, Congress, and actually how you put them into practice is you can make laws to effectuate them. The necessary and proper clause cannot overtake the powers granted. They're bounded by those powers. The 10th Amendment talks about powers as well, and so I don't think there's an inherent conflict between those. The things that are not enumerated are reserved to the states, and so the necessary and proper clause should not, in my opinion, is it cannot infringe upon those that are reserved to the states, because again, it's bounded by the powers in Article 1, Section 8, and it's just to effectuate those powers, and again, it really gives Congress a means by which to exercise those powers. And so it actually is a little bit even narrow, because it doesn't say they can do any law, it just has to be the laws that are necessary and proper. So that's another kind of limiting language from Article 1, Section 8. So,
and this ties into, this question actually stems from where you have talked about taking a lot of programs that are on the federal level and presenting them to the states at a state level to be decided, do you want it or do you not, because this is not a federal program we should be involved in.
Exactly, and because the necessary and proper clause is bounded by the powers enumerated in Article 1, Section 8 on this, you go back to say, is whatever the government doing that we want to give to the states, is that actually authorized or a power of Congress? And, a lot of these will be Commerce Clause, and that's the debate. You go into the, how expansive is the Commerce Clause? Does it encompass things like doing education, right? I think the argument we had that says no, it's not a power of Congress, therefore the necessary and proper clause won't somehow make it a power of Congress, and that way you are free to give it to the states. The other thing too, even if it's a power of Congress, the question is whether Congress should exercise it. Now, certainly things like national defense and whatnot, things that are clear in the Constitution, we're not going to give to the states. But I think there's a lot of room when we talk about these different programs we're talking about, that it will be proper in the Constitution to actually give those to the states. When you look at, again, Article 1, Section 8, how the necessary and proper clause is bounded by that, and the 10th Amendment.
All right. So now on to the three questions that you haven't seen or heard. Many candidates have made statements regarding their stand on gay marriage. Some have even stated that they believe the U.S. Constitution must be amended so as to define marriages between one man, one woman. And the issue brings the following question. Without such an amendment defining marriages between a man and a woman, do you believe it's unconstitutional to enact or enforce a law against a U.S. citizen based on or guided by the citizen's sexual preference, their race, their religion, the color of their skin, or their gender?
Well, you included more than just gay marriage in that when you talk about race,
the gay marriage is.
So I can talk about each one of those.
You could break it down. Where the question came from was in looking at the gay marriage, it was just noted that it was a group. Yep. And that came the question, is it unconstitutional to go put it together a law or have a law guided by a group as a U.S. citizen, that's something that is like with the race, the religion, the color, the gender.
But realize we have, and it's a little bit different, but we do have, for example, Title VII, right? That is a law that prohibits discrimination based on race and ethnicity and things like that, right?
Right.
So we have laws. I guess the question, to what end, right?
Right.
Are you talking about laws that would disadvantage or discriminate? I think the laws that are on the books now are to actually prevent those groups from being singled out and treated differently. It's kind of a way to do that, right? When you talk about gay marriage, I believe in traditional marriage, but marriage, in my opinion, is a state's issue. Marriage and divorce and things like that have always been state issues. So I'm reluctant to go and call for a constitutional amendment. I think we need to see. I know there's a lot of lawsuits going out there, and a lot of these are being challenged under the Equal Protection Clause of state constitutions. I think that's where a lot of the headway's been made on in terms of people who advocate for gay marriage. So, I'm reluctant to call for a constitutional amendment now. I think there's a lot that needs to play out still. It could happen quickly. I mean, there's challenges to Prop 8 in California and whatnot. But again, when I look at kind of the federalism approach between federal and state, I'm reluctant for the federal government to jump into those areas that have traditionally been states. And I understand what could happen. I could understand the potential, that you could have a patchwork where some states recognize gay marriage, and then what would happen, would the other states have to do it or not? Want to wait and see a little bit before we advocate, going right to a constitutional amendment, because in my opinion, amending the Constitution is a big deal. It is a big deal, and you don't take it lightly. and I don't think you do it prematurely. I think you have to consider these things and watch how they go. To your broader question about groups and targeting groups individually, I do believe that we shouldn't treat people differently, except of course if their behavior, of what they actually do and can control, right? So that's why I don't advocate. We're going to have. I think it takes us back years if we have laws that discriminate against race. I don't think anyone wants that, but the laws in the books now that try to make that equal and prohibit that, I think they do provide a good check right now. What I'd love to see happen is our society get to a place where we don't need laws like that. Where just because of who we are and the people we are and the values we hold, we don't need those laws about treating people differently. That we
to protect us.
We can respect all people, right?
Right.
So, but I understand the history and why they came about and things like that. So.
Yeah. Okay. The next one. Now, this following question we've talked about just a little bit, I think. It's a condensed version of several questions I received, but they all kind of have the same overall theme. On both a large scale, and in that I mean years of unchecked actions occurring within the country and its government, down to a personal individual level, there's an overwhelming problem where individuals who are currently working and contributing to society are being forced to pay for those who do not, or have made poor choices in the past, or do not because they receive the incentive by acting a certain way. What should be done to fix this problem?
Well, first of all, I think, when we talk about people who've made wrong choices or have done things like that, to me it's a question on what or who should be looking out for those people, right? I don't advocate, people who are in need to kind of turn them out on the streets. I do believe as people, as our society, we need to look out for others. I don't think necessarily the government should coerce people to do that, right? So a lot of the programs we have are, like you said, taking tax money and redistributing that to people who don't. So I would pull back on that. I think it's healthier for our society when we're not coerced and other people are making decisions, but that we ourselves reach out to our neighbors and help build our communities and help those in need. And I do believe that people step up. One of the things I talk about in my town hall meetings all the time is, when the government's there to take care of everyone, it disincentivizes kind of that community and actually, I think, destroys our community. I look at examples, here in the state of Utah, where there's emergencies or things, there's that big windstorm bountiful, and the community would rally around that to kind of help each other out. I think we'll see a lot more of that if people realize, there's a responsibility for them to do that. Not that, government's there, they can take care of it, so I can just sit back on my couch and do nothing.
Right, and in all fairness, with that question, two of them that stand out in my mind, like I said, this is a lot of questions condensed.
Yeah.
One of the individuals came in with the argument of, I lead a healthy life, I exercise regularly, I'm not Mr. or Mrs. in shape. However, there are people that are so obese that knowingly just do not go down a path that the doctors can say, you will have diabetes, your chances of this and this. So there gets to be a point where this individual who is 300-400 pounds, unable to get out of bed, is requiring all this money, whereas the person who took the accountability and said, I'm not going to smoke, I'm going to get out and walk every day, they're the ones that get to pay for it. And then on the smaller version was the concept of the insurance, where that same person wouldn't go to the ER because they knew that would cost, so they would schedule the visit, and the person that was obese would go just to the ER. So there was the two dynamics, but in a lot of questions.
Right. But again, I think fundamentally you got to think about, I don't think the question is, should we be helping those people? The question is, how and who? And the coercion factor. I look when people take taxes and there's some person in DC redistributing that to me is, I don't have control. I'm not having a choice, right? That's what I say. I would take the federal government more out of that and allow, like I said, local communities and the neighbors and the people to step up. Because again, it's not a question of, should we, the person who's obese and made the wrong choices, should we just let them to go and kind of wallow in their misery and do whatever, and just, no, I think, again, as people, but I don't think maybe the government should coerce someone who doesn't. If you don't want to help that person, you don't help them. But I believe in the goodness of people, and that we can rally around. Again, I don't like it being coerced by the government.
Excellent. And on to the last question. Okay, now the last question actually comes from another delegate, and this is not a verbatim. This was given to me verbally, and so I've just written it as I believe it was intended. Aside from the military, many government officials from the federal level down to the city level raise their right hand and take an oath. Many of the problematic situations we face likely would not exist if that oath was upheld. Every individual government official, if you ask them individually, is going to tell you, I uphold my oath to the highest of standards. I am the gleaming example of, holding that oath, but yet here we are.
Right.
If elected, what solutions can you offer to a public who truly is becoming more disillusioned with that issue and truly wants to participate in solving that problem?
Right, that's a great question. Well, the first thing is I would uphold my oath. I take that very seriously. That's not something I take lightly and would cast aside. I think it's very important to uphold your oath of office. The problem, though, and I think you addressed it in your question, is people have different ideas about the Constitution. I mean, the oath we hope is to defend the Constitution, right? And you're right. I think every elected official would be back there would say, I am given my interpretation of the Constitution, right? And that breaks people apart and polarizes them based on ideological grounds. Some people say, no, you're not. Some people, yes, you are. Here's the point, though, and I think here's the solution. You have to elect people who will uphold the Constitution as you interpret it. But you also have to realize there will always be people, at least in the foreseeable future, hopefully we can change that, but in the foreseeable future, who believe the Constitution and interpret it differently, okay? What I think the best solution for those who you're not going to convince that they're violating their oath of office, I mean, you can go to some people and talk to your blue in the face, and you're not going to convince them that they're violating their oath of office. But if we can unite people around things that aren't polarizing like that, for example, the economy and that fact we can't afford these programs, and we start getting results, and we start limiting our government by cutting programs, and we see results happening, I think people will see that, there is a way to accomplish our conservative vision, right? Even though there's ideological differences in DC. And I think that helps restore the trust and the faith that, okay, we are making movement in the right direction. We are headed down the right path in terms of limiting our government. I'm not naive enough to think that I can convince everyone that they're violating their oath of office. But I am optimistic enough to know that I think we can reach our objectives and where we want to head and work with these people, and we will actually have a limited government that then, they're less likely to violate their oath of office in administering.
Yeah, and with that, one of the statements that was made during it was that there was a feeling, and this question, although it came from a delegate, has, in all honesty, been asked, I think, at almost every meeting that I've gone to where candidates have spoken.
Now,
and
if I could say one thing too, though, I mean, I'm talking about what you do immediately in Congress. Certainly there has to be a broader movement of education, right? You have to continue to educate the public about the Constitution and what it means. But the comment I always make is we need to do both. We have to attack on both sides. But the education is going to be a long process, right? And my campaign, what I'm saying is, let's keep doing that. But I can't wait till we have enough people who think about the Constitution the way we do to get elected in the eastern states or wherever to have a majority in Congress. I mean, that's going to take a while. We just can't wait that long. So I'm looking for ways to be effective and get that limited government now.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Give you a couple more minutes and just tell the people anything that you want to about the campaign. I know in the beginning we heard a lot of the reasons on that. So give us just a little stump speech. Go ahead and just wrap it up with a little of what you're seeing coming up.
Sure.
One of the things you didn't talk about that I know has been talked about, and maybe you could address this one, is whoever the candidate is that is chosen for the Republican, as the Republican nominee, is going to face a very well-positioned individual in a lot of ways. In your stump speech, I don't know, I'd have to go back, talk a little bit maybe about that and a little of where your campaign's going.
Sure. And I'll try to keep it brief. That could be a long answer, but you're absolutely right. You know, whoever the Republican nominee is going to have to face Jim Matheson, and he cannot be underestimated. He's a very good politician. He'll be well funded and have a great organization. So the question always is, how are you going to beat Jim Matheson? I think to understand how you beat him, you got to understand how he's going to win. I think Jim Matheson only wins in this district if he can persuade independent and moderate Republican voters to vote for him. And that's what he's done in the past. So the question is, you know, how do you prevent him from doing that? And you know, I think when you talk about Jim Matheson, you know, he will have a lot of money and power to frame this race, and I can see him framing it in ways that are advantageous to him.
So, in that, with keeping in mind that we want to make sure everything is neutral for all candidates, specifically to you,
right?
How do you see that you are going to be able to frame that
Sure.
when it comes to that?
Well, I call it, I remove the distractions. I think out of all the candidates, I'm the least likely for him to frame as extreme so that he can swoop in and be the reasonable one, right? There's an extreme versus reasonable framing that he can do. I'm also, you know, when you talk about kind of the next layer down, he can also frame this as experience versus non-experience in terms of private sector, education, things like that. I can go toe-to-toe with Matheson on education, on private sector experience. I have the depth there. If you remove the ways he can frame it with the other candidates, the only thing that's left, I think, is to talk about his record. And when you talk about his record, I think you can beat Matheson. Now, he'll attack me, to be fair, he'll attack me as being like, who is this guy? You know, no name ID, you know. Those things, though, are fixable. You know, we'll get the word out, and we're going to, you know, increase the name ID and stuff. But substantively, the only thing left to talk about with me is his record. And when you go there, again, that's how you beat Matheson. We're going to have to get, you know, whoever the Republican nominee is going to have a lot more money, a lot better organization, and that will come with all the candidates. I mean, I think right now no one could go against Matheson. So we will build, we will grow, and we get him talking about his record and not let him have these distractions of framing the race in other ways. That's how you beat Matheson.
All right. Well, Mr. Cobb, thank you so much for all your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Everybody be sure to join the follow-up to this where I'll give a review on Mr. Cobb as a candidate. Thanks for joining WBN 001.